In a quiet town, a waitress and her daughter live unnoticed, until one evening, one bold request and an old violin change everything. You have to watch till the end. This story will surprise you. Subscribe if you value real emotion, and drop a comment. Where are you watching from? The town of Greenville nestled quietly among the hills of upstate New York, where life moved at the pace of footsteps on cobblestone and the rustle of morning newspapers. It was the kind of place where change came slowly, if at all. 3 coffee shops competed for early risers, one quaint bookstore held forgotten treasures on dusty shelves, and at the center of town stood the Glass Room, a restaurant known not only for its cuisine, but for its exclusivity. Crystal chandeliers hung above perfectly arranged tables, and the waitstaff moved with the precision of dancers. It was here, behind the glossy facade, that Sarah Bren spent her evenings. At 37, Sarah had worked at the Glass Room for 6 years. Her uniform was always spotless, her posture straight, and her smile practiced. Never too bright, never too cold. She had long since mastered the art of disappearing into the background, of blending into the rhythm of service. But behind the calm exterior was a life defined by sacrifice. 12-hour shifts, minimal rest, and a polite demeanor regardless of a client's tone. This was her routine. She never complained. In Greenville, stability, even fragile, exhausting stability, was rare, and Sarah held on to it with both hands. The job allowed her to keep a roof over her head and food on the table, but more importantly, it allowed her to be there for Emily. Every night, after her shift ended, Sarah would step out onto the stone steps of the restaurant, and there Emily would be, waiting across the street, her legs crossed on a wooden bench, her fingers gently caressing the worn surface of a violin case. 15 years old, quiet, thoughtful, and almost always with that same faraway look in her eyes as she practiced silently, lost in a world only she could hear. The violin she carried wasn't new. The wood was scratched and the case frayed, but it held more than an instrument. It held memory, connection, something sacred between mother and daughter. Emily had found it years ago in the back of a closet, tucked behind boxes Sarah hadn't opened since returning from New York City. Sarah had once dreamed in music. In her youth, she'd been a promising student at a prestigious music academy in Manhattan, her fingers once dancing confidently over strings in concert halls. But life had rewritten her symphony. A pregnancy at 19, no support from her conservative family, and a broken relationship with her mentor had shattered everything. She'd returned to Greenville, abandoned the stage, and traded compositions for customer service. The violin had been locked away along with her dreams, until Emily. One rainy afternoon when Emily was around 10, she found the case and brought it to her mother wordlessly. There had been a long pause. Sarah remembered staring at it as if it were a ghost from another life. Then, quietly, she opened it. No lessons, no sheet music, no teachers, just memory. She played a single note. Emily watched in awe. From that moment on, Emily became inseparable from the violin. By the time she was 14, she was playing full classical compositions by ear. The town's only music teacher called her a phenomenon, a rare gift. But Sarah had refused offers for competitions or advanced programs, not out of pride, but fear. Fear of stirring up what she had once lost. Emily didn't mind. She played for herself, for her mother, for the echo of something true. Sometimes she helped out at a local music shop repairing broken strings, tuning forgotten instruments. Her world was small, but it was hers. Then came the evening that changed everything. It was late spring, and Sarah was asked to stay for a VIP reservation in the restaurant's private hall. One of the town's most influential guests had requested an intimate dinner with a select group of associates. The staff whispered his name like a warning: Richard Langford. Langford was the founder of a massive investment firm, a billionaire known for his ruthlessness and charm. He came to Greenville twice a year, once for hunting season and once for business deals with local developers. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with sharp silver hair and eyes that scanned a room like they owned it. He arrived precisely at 7 p.m. in a charcoal suit and a black silk tie, his entourage trailing behind. Conversations paused as he entered. For the staff, his visits were both an honor and a nightmare. He tipped well, but tested boundaries. His sense of humor often walked the line between teasing and cruel. Sarah was pouring wine for a table near the hall when she felt his gaze land on her. She turned, composed, and nodded politely. Langford's eyes flicked toward the window. "Is that your daughter?" he asked. Sarah hesitated. Emily sat just outside, her violin case resting beside her, her fingers gently tracing the edge of its strap. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied evenly. "And what's that she's carrying?" he continued, clearly amused. "A violin? Is she playing in a band or something?" "She studies music," Sarah answered carefully. Langford laughed, a full, dismissive laugh that drew the attention of his guests. "In Greenville? Surely you jest. Does she know anything beyond a twinkle twinkle?" There were chuckles around the table. Sarah felt her chest tighten, but she held her expression. "Why don't we find out?" Langford said suddenly. "Let her play, right here. Private concert. I'll even tip her." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, placing it delicately on the edge of the table. Emily looked up, her face unreadable. She wasn't scared, but she wasn't quite at ease either. There was something in her expression, a mixture of confusion and calm defiance. She stood and crossed the street. "You don't have to," Sarah said softly as Emily approached. "I want to," Emily replied. She stepped forward, unzipped the case, and took out the violin. The hum of conversation fell into silence. Forks were set down. The room turned toward her. Even the chefs in the kitchen leaned out to see. Langford leaned back, his grin widening. "Let's begin," he said. Emily placed the bow on the strings. Sarah noticed something strange. Her daughter's hands were still. Not a tremble. And then, the first note. It was hesitant, uncertain, just for a breath. But then the music bloomed. Not just notes, not just technique. A story, a voice, a soul. The sound filled the restaurant like a warm wave, wrapping itself around each listener, pulling them inward. It was a piece from Mascagni's Cavalleria Rusticana, one that Sarah hadn't touched in nearly 2 decades. But Emily played it. Not mimicked, not copied. She lived it. By the time the final note hung in the air, you could hear a pin drop, and then thunderous applause. But no one clapped louder than the man in the gray blazer sitting quietly against the wall, a reserved expression on his face. He stood and approached Sarah. "My name is Thomas Rain," he said quietly. "I represent the Boston Conservatory for Young Musicians. We need to talk about your daughter." Langford didn't applaud. Not right away. His jaw had tightened, his eyes narrowed, as if trying to solve a puzzle that refused to fit. Eventually, he gave a few slow claps and smiled. "Well," he said, "seems you have a talented daughter, Sarah. Quite the surprise." Sarah didn't answer. She stood beside Emily, who was now carefully placing her violin back in the case. Langford's smile faded as he glanced at Rain. You said Boston Conservatory? Rain nodded. A private academy. We offer full scholarships to students with exceptional promise. Langford leaned back, his tone suddenly sharper. Full scholarships? That sounds generous. But how do you profit from that? Or is this one of those charity cases? Rain answered coolly. In extraordinary circumstances, we invest in potential. We cover tuition, housing, meals, everything. Langford's voice rose slightly, enough for others at the table to hear. Well, I have a different model. I could provide her with the best tutors, the best instruments, performances, sponsorships, if she chooses a more practical offer. There was a pause. Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady. Thank you for your generosity, Mr. Langford, she said, but we'll talk it over. No decisions tonight. Langford didn't respond, but the look in his eyes had changed. Something unspoken had shifted in him, like a finely tuned watch skipping a second. And as he sat there watching the girl with the battered violin case disappear into the evening, he realized something that irritated him deeply. He hadn't seen her coming. And he didn't like surprises. The town of Greenville was still humming with whispers the morning after the unexpected concert. For a place where little ever changed, where familiar faces moved through familiar routines, Emily Brenn's impromptu performance in the glass room had rippled through the community like a dropped pebble in a quiet lake. Staff members couldn't stop talking about it. Customers asked about the girl with the violin, and even the owner of the restaurant had asked Sarah if she would consider letting Emily perform regularly. But for Sarah, the night had left behind something heavier. A decision. A fracture between safety and risk. Between routine and everything else. Thomas Rain had kept his word. The very next day, he sent Sarah an email with an official invitation from the Boston Conservatory for Young Musicians. A full scholarship, tuition, housing, meals, books, a rare offer, 1 in 1,000. Sarah printed the documents and placed them in the top drawer of the kitchen cabinet, where bills and unread letters went to wait in silence. She hadn't spoken to Emily about it, not directly, not yet. That evening, as Sarah stood by the host stand folding napkins, Richard Langford returned to the glass room. This time he brought more people. 2 private rooms were reserved, one for business, the other for what his assistant called entertainment. The staff tensed. Langford's presence always meant long hours and tense smiles. Sarah's name was already on the shift list. The manager had asked her specifically. Langford liked her, or at least tolerated her efficiency. She wasn't flashy. She didn't challenge him. That made her the safest choice, or so they thought. By 8 p.m., both rooms were filled, laughter floated through the halls, glasses clinked, music played softly through hidden speakers. Sarah was pouring wine at Langford's table when he spotted her. "Ah, there she is," he said loudly, interrupting a colleague mid-sentence. "Tell me, Sarah, where's our little prodigy tonight? The star of Greenville? Will there be another concert?" Sarah paused. "She's at home, sir." Langford leaned forward with exaggerated disappointment. "That's a shame. I was hoping to be entertained again. That girl has fire, don't you think?" Sarah offered a polite nod. "She does." He tapped his fingers against the table, then grinned. "Well, if she changes her mind, you let her know she's always welcome." At that very moment, the dining room doors opened quietly. Emily stepped in. She was wearing a simple gray dress, her violin case slung over her shoulder. Her hair was pinned back in a neat bun. She looked older, steadier. Sarah turned in surprise. "Emily, what are you doing here?" "I felt like I needed to be here," Emily said softly. Langford's eyes lit up as she approached. "Look who's come to join the show," he announced. "What timing." Emily ignored the comment. She moved towards the corner of the room, opened the case, and took out the violin. The room fell into a hush. Someone dimmed the overhead lights. Langford leaned back, a smirk on his lips. "Let's see what the encore sounds like," he murmured. Emily stood by the large window, the city lights behind her like a crown of amber. She didn't speak. She simply raised the violin and began to play. But it wasn't classical this time, not something from Sarah's past. This was new, her own. A modern piece structured around the bones of a sonata but built with the raw edge of emotion, fear, defiance. It began gently, thin, tentative notes like raindrops on glass. Then came the surge. Stronger, faster, layered. She wasn't just playing music. She was declaring her voice. Not a girl repeating history, but a girl forging her own. Her eyes never once met the crowd. She played as if the room didn't exist. She played as if she were alone, and for the first time, completely free. When the final note dissolved into silence, no one moved. For a second, it seemed even the walls had stopped breathing. Then came the applause. Slow at first, then building, a full roar of approval. Someone whistled. A man rose from his seat. Even Langford clapped, but not with enthusiasm. His expression had changed. There was no smile, just calculation. Quiet, cold calculation. Rain had appeared during the performance and now approached with deliberate steps. He stopped beside Emily. "You have to come with us," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't a choice anymore, Emily. It's a responsibility." Emily looked at Sarah. There was no hesitation in her gaze. Sarah nodded. Rain turned to her. "Tomorrow morning, I'll be back with the final paperwork. We'll handle everything. She's ready." Later, as the restaurant emptied and Sarah was changing out of her uniform, Langford appeared near the staff entrance. He wasn't smiling. "That was impressive," he said quietly. "Very moving. And she's talented, no doubt." Sarah didn't respond. "But talent without guidance can be wasted," he continued. "Academies are fine, but they don't know how to shape careers. I can give her that. Exposure, contacts, a path to the stage, to the world." "She's already on a path," Sarah said firmly. "I can offer more than they ever will." "You can offer control," Sarah corrected, "but she's not for sale." Langford sighed. He pulled a sleek business card from his jacket and held it out. "She'll need support. When she realizes the academy isn't enough, tell her to call me. I'll still be here." Sarah didn't take the card. Langford nodded once and walked away. Outside, the air was cool, the stars barely visible through the city haze. Inside the staff room, Sarah sat for a long time, holding the door handle, eyes fixed on the floor. Emily was leaving, and nothing would ever be the same again. 3 days passed. The whispers in the Greenville faded, and the world outside the glass room returned to its gentle rhythm. But inside Sarah's mind, time had stilled. The scholarship documents still sat untouched in the kitchen drawer. Every time she opened it to find a receipt or a spoon, they stared back at her, silent, waiting, undeniable. She hadn't spoken much to Emily about them, not in the way she should have. Part of her still clung to the illusion that if she avoided the conversation, life would remain unchanged. But nothing was the same. Sarah caught herself watching Emily differently now, listening differently. Her daughters playing, once a quiet backdrop to their evenings, now sounded like something larger. It filled their small apartment. It bled through the walls. It asked questions Sarah wasn't ready to answer. Emily didn't bring it up either. She didn't ask when they would respond to Rain or whether she should pack. She just kept playing. She played Vivaldi, Bach, haunting Celtic melodies Sarah didn't recognize. And then, one evening, Sarah stood outside her daughter's door and heard something new. A piece with a broken rhythm, strange pauses, and piercing high notes that landed like sharp stars in the night sky. She didn't ask about it. She just listened. Friday arrived. Another shift, another evening at the glass room. The manager had once again asked Sarah to stay late. Langford had returned, this time with even more guests. 2 separate bookings, one for business, one for celebration. His assistant called ahead to make sure the same waitress from last time would be there. Sarah said yes. Not because she wanted to, but because saying no to Langford usually had consequences. Besides, she wanted it done. One last evening to settle everything inside her, to let the questions fall into place. She arrived early, dressed, tied her apron, and checked the table settings. At around 7:45, she turned the corner toward the service hallway and froze. Emily was there, in the shadows near the staff lockers, holding her violin case. "Emily?" Sarah asked, surprised. "What are you doing here?" The girl shrugged softly. "I just felt like I should come." Sarah studied her for a moment. "You're sure?" Emily nodded. "I don't know why. I just feel like something's waiting." Sarah wanted to protest. She wanted to say, "Not again, not tonight, this isn't our world." But she didn't. She only nodded. Langford's private room was already alive when they stepped into view. The guests were loud, glasses half full, laughter bouncing off the walls. Langford, in a navy suit with a gold tie, was already sipping his 3rd glass of wine when he saw Sarah walk by. He raised a hand. "Sarah," he called out smoothly, "tell me, where's our little star? Are we being treated to another concert tonight?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Emily stepped out from behind her, violin already in hand. Gasps, a hush. Half the room froze, the other half turned curiously. Langford looked genuinely pleased. "Well," he chuckled, "second act. Let's hope it lives up to the first." He gestured to the waiter. "Turn the music off." Someone dimmed the lights. Emily walked to the far end of the room, toward the tall windows facing the city. The restaurant lighting made her appear almost ethereal, a silhouette against the blurred orange street lamps. She didn't look at the guests, didn't acknowledge Langford. She closed her eyes and raised her bow, and then she played. It wasn't classical, not this time, not even contemporary. What came out of her violin was something else, something wild and raw. The music began with a trembling whisper, a hesitant heartbeat. Notes stretched like threads, pulling listeners forward. Then came the thunder. Fierce chords, urgent crescendos, a pulsing rhythm that sounded like defiance itself. It was her piece, her own, crafted from memory, stitched with pain and hope, and something wordless in between. Sarah stood frozen near the door. She couldn't breathe. This wasn't a performance. This was a declaration. Emily wasn't asking for approval anymore. She was saying, "I'm here." She was saying, "I know who I am." She was saying, "I don't need permission to be heard." The last note lingered, so fragile it might have shattered, and then silence. No movement, no applause, not at first, just a long, aching stillness. Then a single pair of hands clapped, then another, then the whole room erupted. Chairs scraped, people stood. Someone shouted her name. This wasn't just appreciation, it was recognition. Langford clapped too, slowly, but his smile had vanished. His eyes were locked on Emily, unblinking, unreadable. Rain stepped forward from the corner where he'd been waiting. He didn't look at the crowd, only at her. "You have to go," he said quietly. "It's not a suggestion anymore. It's a responsibility." Emily turned to her mother. "Are you ready?" Sarah nodded, trying to speak but unable to form words. Rain looked at them both. "Tomorrow morning. I've already prepared the paperwork. We'll begin the process. You leave in 4 days." Emily took a deep breath. "I'll go." When the crowd finally dispersed, Langford approached Sarah at the bar. His steps were measured, his tone low. "You've got a rare one," he said. "No doubt." Sarah didn't answer. "You could use help," he continued. "I know what it's like, to be alone with a gifted child. The world doesn't wait for them to grow. The world eats them alive if they're not protected." Sarah turned to face him. "We're not looking for protection. We're looking for freedom." Langford pulled a business card from his jacket and placed it on the table. "I can give her everything, real stages, contracts, agents. The academy's fine, but I can make her career. Let her think about it." Sarah stared at the card. "She'll decide, without pressure." He smiled thinly. "Everyone thinks they're free until the bills come in." Sarah didn't touch the card. "She'll choose, without you." Langford leaned in slightly. "Just don't forget, every rising star needs someone to hold the ladder." Sarah met his gaze evenly. "Maybe she'll build her own." He paused, then stepped back, adjusting his jacket. "Then I'll wait," he said, "and when she falls, I'll be the one still offering my hand." He left without another word. Sarah stood there alone for a long moment, her hands trembling, but not from fear, from certainty. Emily was leaving, and this time there would be no going back. The apartment felt smaller than ever. There were no sounds that morning. No music, no clatter of dishes, no soft thumps of Emily moving between rooms. Just silence. And in that silence, Sarah sat alone at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. Across from her, the printed documents from the Boston Conservatory lay in a perfectly straight stack, as if the order could make the decision any easier. The scholarship was real. It covered everything: classes, room, meals, even health insurance. It was more than Sarah had ever imagined for her daughter, and yet the fear clung to her like a second skin. Outside the window, the sun was rising, painting the rooftops with pale gold. Sarah closed her eyes and remembered herself at Emily's age, her own violin case heavier than it looked, her hopes even heavier. It had all felt so certain then, and then it had all fallen apart. Footsteps approached. Emily appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, hair tousled from sleep. She didn't say anything. She just walked over and sat down across from her mother. Sarah took a slow breath. "Do you think it's the right thing?" she asked without looking up. Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think it's the thing that scares me the most, and that probably means it is." Sarah looked at her daughter, so calm, so composed, and yet she could see the storm just beneath the surface. Emily had always been good at hiding it, just like Sarah. "I'm scared," Sarah admitted. Emily nodded. "Me too." Sarah hesitated, then stood and crossed the room. From the bookshelf, she pulled out an old photo album covered in a thin layer of dust. She returned to the table and opened it slowly. On the first page was a photo of a girl, young, smiling, in a school uniform, standing beside an old upright piano. "That's you," Emily whispered. Sarah nodded. "I was 19, the last year before everything changed." Page after page, she turned the memories over. Rehearsals, a recital, a party, and finally, a photo of Sarah with a young man. Tall, dark-haired, holding a violin in one hand and her waist in the other. "That's him," Emily said quietly. "Martin," Sarah said, barely audible. "We were in an ensemble together. He was older, brilliant, And when I told him about you, he disappeared." Emily looked at her mother. "You were alone." Sarah's smile was soft and sad. "Almost. My parents didn't take it well. My teacher told me to take a year off, but I knew I wouldn't go back. Everything began to unravel. I came home, found a job, and then you were born. Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to think you ruined anything," Sarah said, finally meeting her daughter's eyes. "You didn't. You saved me from a life I wasn't ready for, but I did lose something. For a while, I thought it was forever." Emily reached across the table and held her mother's hand. "But it wasn't." Sarah shook her head. "No, it came back. Through you." They sat in silence, their fingers entwined. "I don't want to leave you," Emily said suddenly, her voice cracked for the first time. "I'm afraid of going alone." Sarah brushed a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "And I'm afraid of letting you go. But you have to, not because of your talent, because you're ready. You're braver than I ever was." Emily took a deep breath. "But you didn't give up. You raised me. That's stronger than any concert." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She smiled. "No, sweetheart, that is music, just a different kind." 2 days later, Thomas Rain returned to Greenville, this time not to a restaurant. He came directly to the small apartment on the edge of town. A sedan with Massachusetts plates waited at the curb. A woman with a clipboard and a friendly smile stepped out behind him. Everything was in order. Rain handed over the final contracts. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "there's a 6 a.m. flight out of Albany. We'll have a driver." Sarah nodded and signed where needed. Emily stood by the doorway, her suitcase already packed. The violin case was wrapped in a protective cover, resting gently at her feet. Rain turned to her. "Are you ready?" Emily didn't hesitate. "Yes." He gave her a small smile. "Good. You've already done the hard part." After he left, Sarah walked into Emily's room. The sunlight was falling in soft streaks through the blinds. On the bed sat a small letter, folded neatly. Her name was written on the front. She picked it up, her hands trembling slightly. "For Emily," it said inside. That evening, just before bed, she handed it to her daughter. "Read it on the plane," she whispered. "I don't always know how to say the right things out loud." Emily nodded and slipped the envelope into her coat pocket. She didn't open it. Instead, she wrapped her arms around Sarah and held her tight. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Everything had been said in the silence. The next morning, the airport in Albany was nearly empty. The waiting area was cold, the chairs stiff. Emily sat by the window, watching the lights blink along the tarmac. Her violin case rested against her leg. The letter was still in her pocket. Rain sat a few seats away, reading a schedule. His assistant, a young woman named Kate, scrolled through her phone. The world moved gently, as if it, too, didn't want to wake up just yet. Emily unfolded the letter. "Emily, if you're reading this, it means you're already on your way. Maybe I'm sitting in the kitchen now, drinking coffee and trying not to cry. I know you. You look calm, but there's a storm inside you. You've always been good at hiding it. You're stronger than I was. Smarter. More honest with yourself. Don't forget, music isn't just about stages. It's about truth. It's about who you are. Play what's true to you. Don't change to fit their expectations. And if you ever lose a note, if the world gets too loud, remember I am always there. Even if just in memory. With love, Mom." Emily closed the letter slowly. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't cry. She looked out the window as the sky began to lighten, and for the first time in days she smiled. The Boston Conservatory for Young Musicians was nothing like Greenville. It stood in a quiet suburb just outside the city, housed in an old brick building with tall, arched windows and a tower that had once served as a library. Inside, the walls were lined with wood panels, the floors gleamed from daily polishing, and the air carried the faint scent of varnish, old paper, and rosin. Here, everything breathed music. Not performance, not showmanship, but something deeper, older, focused. Even the silence between rehearsals felt tuned. Emily arrived with nothing but a small suitcase and her violin case. The academy had already provided linens, uniforms, and a shared dorm room with another student named Lily, a serious girl who studied piano and spoke in clipped sentences. They weren't friends, not at first, but they shared long, exhausted silences at the end of each day, and that was enough. The first few weeks were brutal. Her professors were intense. The students were competitive, some technical to the point of soullessness, others chaotic with emotion but lacking control. Emily struggled to find her place. Her technique was unpolished compared to others. She hadn't studied theory in depth. She barely knew the language of musical criticism. But every time she felt herself slipping, she remembered Sarah's letter. Play what's true to you. Don't change to fit their expectations. Her instructor, Professor Vincent, was a tall, stern man with sharp features and a habit of listening with his eyes closed. After her first solo session, he had remained silent for a long moment before saying, "You lack form, but there's something in your tone that can't be taught. Don't lose that chastened perfection." So she worked, 6 to 7 hours a day. Scales, etudes, sight reading, breath control, phrasing, repetition until her fingers ached. Some nights she wept into her pillow, silently, so Lily wouldn't hear. Some mornings she wondered if she had made a mistake, if she had flown too far from home. But then she'd remember her mother's hands, the old photo album, the sound of the violin in their tiny kitchen, and she would pick up the bow again. Months passed. Winter crept in, coating the city in gray, muffling the streets. The academy began preparations for its annual winter concert, a showcase for donors, journalists, and partner schools. It was the most prestigious performance of the year, and the program was carefully curated by Rain and the senior faculty. 3 weeks before the event, Professor Vincent summoned Emily to his office. She entered, expecting to be given a small part in an ensemble or perhaps a short solo. Instead, he said simply, "You'll close the concert." She stared at him, stunned. "Me?" He nodded. "We debated it. Rain made the final call. I don't have anything prepared." "Then you have 3 weeks," Vincent replied. "Play something that only you can play." Emily left the office in a daze. For days, she sat with her violin and played fragments, memories, themes. She returned to melodies her mother had once hummed in the dark, to the piece she had written for the second night in the classroom, and then, slowly, she built something new. A piece that began in silence. A piece that honored the music that had raised her. A piece that said, "I'm here, and this is my voice." The night of the concert arrived. The Academy's auditorium, normally modest and calm, had been transformed with spotlights, programs, photographers. Rows of donors and faculty filled the seats. Representatives from conservatories in New York, Los Angeles, even Europe were in attendance. In the front row sat Thomas Rain, hands clasped, face unreadable. Backstage, Emily stood in a simple black dress Lily had helped her pick out. Her hands were cold. Her breath came shallow. Her violin, no longer the battered one from Greenville, but a new one gifted by the Academy upon her acceptance, rested in her lap. But back in her room, on her desk, her old violin still waited in its case. This new one sang brighter, cleaner, but the old one had memory in its wood. When her name was announced, Emily stepped onto the stage. The lights blinded her for a moment. She could barely make out the faces, but in her mind, she pictured Sarah, sitting in their kitchen, the photo album open, coffee going cold. She placed the bow on the string, and she began. The piece opened with the same gentle theme her mother used to play, a lullaby in minor, delicate, and aching. Then it grew. It wove in elements from her own compositions, from the sonata she had first performed for Langford, from the emotional swells of heartbreak and hope. At the climax, it broke into a storm of notes, frantic, pulsing, honest, and finally it returned, quieter, more resolved, to the original theme. But this time the notes were different, mature, earned, transformed. The last vibration faded into stillness. And then the applause rose. Not polite, not obligatory, thunderous. Several people stood, some cheered, others simply stared, stunned. From his place at the back, Thomas Rain smiled. He knew she had passed the real test. Not the musical one, the human one. She had survived herself. 1 week later, a small feature appeared in American Strings, a national music journal. Emily Bren, the girl who played the silence. The article was brief. It recounted her performance, her background, her acceptance into the academy. But what caught Sarah's eye was the quote at the end. "My first music teacher wasn't famous. She worked as a waitress, but she taught me everything that matters. She taught me to hear music in the quiet, and she taught me not to be afraid of my own sound." Sarah read it, sitting in a nearly empty cafe on a snowy Tuesday morning. The waitress thought something was wrong when she saw her crying, but Sarah just smiled through her tears and shook her head. "No, it's okay. It's just happiness." Back in Greenville, life moved on. Langford hadn't returned to the glassroom. Officially, he was on leave from his company after a series of failed investments and a scandal involving manipulation of small-town developments. No one missed him. The restaurant changed owners. The staff changed uniforms. A young pianist now played soft jazz in the corner, and some of the old regulars still asked if the girl with the violin might ever come back. But she wouldn't. She was gone. On to new stages, new cities, new stories. Not because someone discovered her, but because she played her note, because she chose to be heard. And sometimes that's all it takes. 3 minutes of truth. And the world remembers your name. Sometimes all it takes is the courage to play your note, even when no one believes in you. This story is a reminder. Your voice matters. If this touched you, leave a like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments how it made you feel. Your voice matters to us too.